Of a note boom variation, which is basically a d4, d5 queen's pawn opening with an early pawn takes c4 by black, and then I was going to do five viewer games. But yeah, let's get started. So the first one here is an analysis of so this is called the note boom variation. I'd never heard that name before, but once I started looking into it, it had been a variation that I'd seen pretty frequently. It's just basically the semi-Slav played against knight f3 and knight c3, and here the move generally isn't pawn takes c4, but pawn takes c4 is considered to be the note boom variation. The main move here is knight to f6, and pawn takes c4 is usually delayed until pawn takes d3. Overall, d takes c4 is kind of a move that I'm not a huge fan of. I think basically pawn takes c4 kind of simplifies the position a little bit earlier than it should be. This ends up being pretty interesting. The moves here for white tend to be a4 first, then bishop to b4, then e3 or e4 here. But basically, a4 is by far the most common response move to pawn takes c4. I'm not super familiar with these types of openings. As black, when I have this semi-Slav structure, I just hold these pawns right here like this, and I don't basically take at least until the bishop plays to d3, and often not at all. So this variation is interesting to me, and it was helpful to kind of learn a little bit more about this theory. On pawn takes c4, I play a4, bishop b4, and then white has the choice between e3 and e4, depending on how he wants to recapture the c4 pawn. But let's take a look at e3, which is the more common line. E3, b5, bishop d2, a5, a takes b5, and then bishop takes c3, bishop takes c3, c takes b5. And then b3 basically is an undermining move attacking this queenside pawn structure. Hey, welcome, Tarash. Thank you very much for joining the stream. Thanks. So this is interesting. Basically, that early, that early b3 seems to be pretty powerful for white. It tends to undermine the pawn on b5, and overall c3, undermines the c5. I'm gonna switch my schedule around. You're making totally a good point about that, Tarash. Usually, I've been doing this one at 6, but since I have a class today, I was planning to do this one at 5 and then finish by 6:30. I'm gonna have to fix my schedule. I actually messed up earlier. I told people the wrong time too. So it shows me being kind of dumb about this, but yeah, I'm probably going to switch it around because I have this class now that's going to interfere with Monday, Wednesday, and Saturday. So I'll figure something else. Anyways, thank you anyways for joining, Tarash. I guess if it's just you and me, then we can we can take a look at whatever. But d takes c4 was the most common thing. I'm gonna post on my Discord. Just to make sure everyone's here. But yeah, we'll see what happens. Yeah, no, thanks, Tarash. Not really, unfortunately. If you, yeah, no, because I got to start my thing right. I have to start my class right at 6:30, so I can't, unfortunately. But yeah, totally. So yeah, do you know if you know much about this variation? I'm totally open to learn about it. This is interesting. So basically, when I see this opening, I don't think of pawn takes c4 here. I think of semi-Slav. Basically, this structure I think of as being fine. Pawn takes c4 is a play for black, and everything generally tends to be fine with this pawn structure as is. So I don't completely understand why black would want to mess up that structure, but I don't know, whatever. It's not terrible. E4 and yeah, that's what I generally think, Tarash. I generally think that you delay pawn takes c4 until bishop to d3 gets played. So pawn takes c4, and I think, yeah, I think, I don't know, you're simplifying early as black, and you can potentially allow the white to take that pawn with an early. Hey, thank you very much for the follow, Adriana. Thanks. I watched your stream earlier, Adriana, and yeah, thanks for being here. But yeah, so this ends up being, this analysis variation seems like a very early pawn takes c4 for black. It's hey, welcome Limestone. Yeah, so this gives up control of the e4 square, right? So it has the normal issue with like the queen's gambit, but yeah, a4, bishop b4, e4, e4, e3. I was gonna go through the whole undermining thing for e3, b5, bishop d2, a5, pawn takes, and then bishop takes before pawn takes, right? Because otherwise knight takes. But yeah, so bishop takes c3, bishop takes c3, pawn takes b5, and basically yeah, exactly. No, I don't see the compensation there either, Tarasha. So it's it seems a little bit I don't know, just generally shaky. I guess I would say pawn takes c4 could be played later. So I don't know. So here b3 undermines this and starts this indirect attack on b5. Bishop b7, b takes c4, b4, and basically here I really like white's pawn structure. Yeah, no, it's not a line that I would play either, to be honest. I think this is too early for pawn takes c4. So here, bishop b2, it's the main line, and white's position just looks better. The positions getting evaled is roughly equal, but like these pawns look good. This is a connected passed pawn. I mean, this seems better for white, but. Anyways, this is actually mainline theory for this. Yeah. Traxler is tricky. It's just it's tough to be fair. I would play d5 into the Traxler line. I wouldn't play bishop c5 or think to play bishop c5. But yeah, if you keep playing it, I'm sure you'll see it occasionally. But it's a very aggressive line and a lot of book stuff. So I don't know. It's pretty dangerous. But anyways, this line, I'm surprised that the eval is so ungenerous to white here. Like, overall, I think this looks good. Hey, thank you very much for the follow, Clem. Really appreciate you being here. Yeah, but yeah, if we just go back to the beginning, it doesn't seem like black can hold this pawn. And in the same way that the queen's gambit... Right, so they have two outside passed pawns, but to me, it sort of just looks like your general queen's gambit thing, where if you try to hold the pawn, this is going to end up in a bad situation for black. So b3 is the move. So the important moves here are basically a4 and then e3, b5, bishop d2, a5, pawn takes, pawn takes b7, and b3 is the key move. Continue the undermining on the queen side. And then bishop to b7 here, pawn takes, bishop b4. And overall here, I like white's position. So yeah, I guess black does have connected pass pawns too, so that is some compensation. But yeah, this is the main line for this note boom variation. Interesting. Yeah, I'm surprised that the eval is so good on white versus black here. Right. Yeah. Yeah. I think that's basically right. I think black's plan. I don't know. If I was playing black here, I would play like knight f6, castles, and a4 almost immediately. Like probably 3 moves after this, I'd play a4 and really start to attack on the queen side. But I don't know. I just like white has a single pawn, a single pawn island going up against against 2 pawn islands for black. So bishop b2, it doesn't look like it has a pretty low draw rate. Yep. Knight f6, bishop d3, knight d7, castles, rook e1, knight e4, queen c2. And overall, this pressure on h7 looks pretty good. I feel like this, I don't know, I'm just seeing this equals and thinking that I would rather take white's position here, but I don't know. Both sides have chances to win, right? Let's go back. Where did the actual... So castles, rook e1, knight e4, queen c2. overall here, I think this is pretty much so this structure just looks really good to me. I'm surprised that black isn't worse, but I would just figure bishop c4, threats on e6. Yeah, white is much better, exactly, right? Isn't that what you would... I think white's much better here, so it's weird that the eval is giving equals. The win rate's not super good. I mean, this top one's a little weak, but yeah. I'm just surprised by the eval. Yeah, it's interesting. I'm thinking bishop c4, big queen b3. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, now especially with the pawn on c5, I would think that this c5 pawn, I think you could play rook, probably not rook a4 actually, because bishop c6. But I wonder if you could double the rooks on the a file and start attacking the a5 pawn. Or knight d2, knight c4. It's tricky and interesting. Yeah, maybe it might be an engine, an engine thing. But I just like this better. I mean, I don't know. It's better. The engine eval is much better than I am, so any engine eval is better than me. So, but anyways, I would figure that there's enough attacks for white. But let's go back. Let's go back and see this variation again. Pawn takes c4, a4, bishop to b4, and then e3. E4 is also playable here, and e3, e3, b5, bishop d2, a5. I wonder if there's any sidelines here. Bishop to b7, not really. So yeah, so just this undermining move. B takes c3, c takes b5, and b3 being the key response for white. It forks off a little bit here. B takes c4, b4. Bishop b2, and then the real split comes on this move. So you have bn d7 and you have castles. But either way, hey, welcome, R. Yeah, sorry guys, I gave the wrong time earlier today. I was still thinking that today was not Wednesday, but because I have class at 6:30, I have to because I have class at 6:30, I pretty much have to start it at 5. I'm gonna change the schedule around probably in the next week or so. But yeah. Why does white unstack opponent's pawns? Well, it's more that white's just trying to undermine. So basically, black has more or less accepted the queen's gambit here. He accepted it on like move 5 or 6. But here b5, bishop d2, a5, and then a takes b5, b takes c5, and then basically here. Sorry, this isn't the main line. The main line is bishop takes first, b takes, c takes, and overall, white's still down a pawn, but his goal is to undermine this queenside pawn structure, like in the queen's gambit. b3 does this, and then it's so basically in this variation, there's very little forking in terms of the early moves. Basically up until this point, there's more or less one move for each side. This time we'll play bn d7. And now things are a little bit more optional, unclear in terms of, opening transpositions. But I just basically wanted to, confused on a takes b5. Yeah, it's mostly just to undermine the queenside pawns. I would think about this in terms of yes, it is Kira. Good question. Yeah, I've got classes that start at 6:30 on Mondays and Wednesdays now, so I am gonna have to switch around the afternoon schedule. I might make it later. You know what I'm gonna do? Probably, I think I might put up a poll to see when you guys are when the most people are available. To be honest, I think that might be good. Just because so my class runs from 6:30 to 9:30 Eastern. 2 days a week, and then on Saturday mornings. So I'm gonna have to figure out exactly how to work around that with the stream. But the morning one should be okay every day but Saturday. But I don't know. I'm gonna have to come up with some switch in the schedule. Anyways, the important part of the note boom gambit that I wanted to go through was d takes c4 very early, basically disrupting the semi-Slav structure voluntarily. And then white plays a4 first, then e3, and then on b5, white plays pawn takes b3. So pawn takes, bishop to c3, or bishop to d2, threatening this b5, and then basically works to undermine the queenside pawns as efficiently as possible. It's sort of basically the queen's gambit accepted for white, and in the queen's gambit accepted for white, this undermining, always works out. Basically, white can force the recapture of the gambited pawn, and here, it's more or less the same concept. The undermining moves will be things like b3 here, and bishop takes c3. But after this happens, you basically go with b3 as an undermining move for this for this queenside, and these moves are surprisingly forced. So just so we know, I'll go through it one more time. d4, d5, semi-Slav structure for white. Early pawn takes c4, early a4, and then e3 as opposed to e4. E3, b5, bishop d2, but all of these moves are basically forced. If you look at the opening book here, the opening book here is actually very narrow. Bishop d2, a5, pawn takes, bishop takes, c takes, b3. And if you just look at the percentage of games in this note boom variation that are that are exactly this line, it's 99% of these note boom games turn out exactly like this. So the real forks don't come until later, and the main theme of the game, which I think favors white, is going to be to probably advance these pawns and make sure that black doesn't advance his pawns. Both sides are going to go a little bit towards their kingside development. They're both probably going to castle and move their minor pieces out on the next move, but the game doesn't really start until about move 13 or 14. So yeah, this is all sort of pre-established theory, not a great opportunity for divergence, and yeah, interesting opening. It's more or less queen's gambit accepted with a very early pawn takes c4. So interesting. I like white's position here. I'm in disagreement with the engine. I think the engine's being pretty ungenerous to white. White has one pawn island and what feels like better minor pieces. So I like white's position more than the engine does. But overall, an interesting opening, and we can take a look. I may take a look at this some other day as well. It goes against my instinct, which is to not break up the semi-Slav structure, but it seemed to play out fine. So I don't know. Interesting. All right, so here's SWWI's game playing as black. D4, D5, and Bishop G5. This is a pretty interesting game. I didn't know what this was called. The Levitsky attack. All right. Awesome. I love how chess.com labels these though. I've learned so many names of crazy openings here. But Bishop to G5 is pretty far down the list in terms of Queen's openings. I'm actually surprised it's number 4 though, to be honest. I've never seen someone play this. But then again, I play knight f6 against d4, so yeah, there's a lot of crazy openings. Yeah, that one I know Mikey comes with an early bishop c4 against the Sicilian. But overall, yeah, it is fun. It is actually really cool. You get to build up your vocabulary. I hadn't done this. I hadn't done analysis on chess.com. But yeah, now I know all the names of the minor ones that I hadn't for a very long time. So bishop g5, ideas, bishop f5 sort of makes sense. Matches the bishop development. Eyes like knight f6, c6, c5. There's a bunch of options here. I would probably just play knight f6. Honestly, if white wants to trade off his bishop on move 3 for my knight, that's probably fine with me. Should be fine with me. So yeah, I guess I'd play knight f6 here. I would not play h6. I don't think h6 is a good use of tempo. I think you want to develop here, or play something that strengthens the center. But h6 serves no purpose other than to just harass this bishop, which isn't that great. So I would say knight f6 here. That's my recommendation. Knight c3, knight d7, knight f3, g6. Sure. So white's basically just sort of developing around this structure. This structure is fine. What's a little unusual about this game is the knight c3 came so early. With knight c3, this is with this early knight c3, white loses the opportunity to play the c pawn forward. I think that's not the strongest. Here I would probably play I would probably play as white c4. In this situation, I think you still can play c4. Nah, maybe not. I don't know. Yeah, because knight c6 is not a good, or is a bad, strong defensive move for black. So I would say c4, pawn takes c4, queen a4 doesn't actually work here anymore because you can play knight c6, queen takes c4, queen takes. So yeah, interesting. Anyways, this is some theory that I don't know particularly well. The super early bishop g5. Bishop f5 looks like a reasonably intuitive thing. But yeah, so here bishop to f5. e3, knight f6, knight c3, e6. Black's looking just fine. Overall here, I think black has basically equalized. White's missing his key c-pawn resource, and with bishop to g4, he should be fine. So I like the way that black has played this so far. a6 is probably a little quiet. I would continue development. I would probably play bishop to b4 here. Cool. This all looks like makes sense to me. G4 is pretty committal. Basically from this point, white hasn't yet signaled that, where he's going to be playing in this game, but G4 sort of commits white to a kingside attack, and I'm not sure that's that great because this kingside, the G6 pawn provides a good defensive resource in on this stream. So, I don't know. I guess queen to b6 is a tactical play. Queen to b6 threatens this d4 pawn and this b2 pawn. Rook c8 makes sense from a fundamental perspective, but you actually have a tactical blow here, queen to b6, that looks pretty good. So, yeah, queen b6 queen b6 is technically over rook c8, but rook c8 is fine from a fundamental perspective. I don't have much of a complaint, even though the computer calls it a mistake. Queen takes, knight takes. Yeah, overall, I think black's looking fine. G6, cool. Cool. Yeah, no, I looks good to me, to be honest. Yeah. Oh, whoa, what happened? Right, okay, so I remember talking about this game. So, this is dangerous. This gets surprisingly difficult. I don't think it's that it's a good question, our paradox. But yeah. So if we go back, thank you for. Always feel free to stop me if you have a question. But yeah, let's take a look at that R paradox. The reason why I think they call it a mistake is because queen. It's not a mistake because it's bad or anything. Although you do lose the opportunity to castle queenside, so that's true. That's true. That's a good point. That is another problem with rook to c8 is you lose the ability to castle queenside. I think it's probably worth it because of this, but I think what really makes it a mistake, or why the computer is calling queen to b6 a mistake here, or sorry, rook to c8 a mistake here, is because queen to b6 makes an immediate tactical threat that wins a pawn. So yeah, I didn't explain this super easily or super well, our paradox, but thank you for bringing it up. Yeah, queen to b6 here, right? Yeah, so that is that is valuable. I should pay more attention to that that aspect of it. But I actually think the main reason is because on queen to b6 you have this this threat on the b2 and the d4 pawns. That's why I think they're calling it a mistake. But there's an aspect of it. Yeah, I am sort of underestimating how valuable castling queenside is here. That having that option available is also helpful for black. Yeah. Although to be fair here, I might just castle, or I just might not castle in this situation. Like, this looks like a game where you could pretty safely play king to d7. Like, I don't think anything's gonna get in there. So that's what I would say about this. King to d7 looks like a better. Yeah, king to d7, I guess, is maybe how I would deal with the king safety here. But yeah, you're right. Castling queenside also provides a good option. But I think the main thing is that No, I mean, I don't know. This king safety is probably one of the worst, or like king placement is probably one of the biggest challenges for black in this situation. But I think the most direct reason why rook to c8 is considered a mistake is not because it's necessarily bad. I think it's a good move because it places this rook on a a semi-open file. But what's good about queen to b6 is this fork on d4 and b2. Yeah, so I think queen to b6 is it's not that rook c8 is bad. It's that queen b6 is such a strong tactic. This fork is good for black. So yeah, so I think it's that. I think that's my thinking on this is queen to b6 threatening d4 and b2. But anyways, rook c8 is less good than that. But I think black plays a great game. Going into this endgame. Here I feel like black should probably be able to convert this. I think that he can maybe even get a pawn, right? If he plays rook a3, then the only defensive move is rook to a2. Then he plays rook to g3, and then the only defensive move is rook to h5, and then he plays rook to g2. And I think he can pick off one more, so he'll be up like 5 pawns to 1. But yeah, overall, I think this is sort of just good for black. But this was an error. You need to clear off this c pawn. Basically with rook to c3, rook takes e6, and this win becomes a lot less clear. I think ideas like f4, f3 become the best. But really, when you play rook to c3, you sort of fracture the pawns. I would play rook to c5 here. If this rook plays a6 to defend, you just play e5 and have no pawn vulnerabilities. But yeah, this overall ends up playing out. This is an unfortunate drawing situation for black. So really, I think this comes down to a tactical error. Let's see if black actually wins here. Yeah, nice. Okay, so black ends up winning the queen versus rook endgame. But here, I think black's just got basically a very solidly won position. So let's slow down and take a look at this pawn endgame. I think what you're looking for is basically appealing, tactical moves. And I think you can do it with rook to c3. The correct direction to tactically attack this pawn is, I think, on the side, and then when a4 gets played, just play pawn takes a4. But here, rook to b2, rook to h5, rook to b3, and yeah, b4, and you're just sort of pushing these pawns forward. That's my recommendation on this. But you definitely don't want to trade off the pawns if you don't have to. This is an error. With rook to c5, you basically force one of two things. You either force 3 pawns against 0, in which case your winning chances are good and your losing chances are very low, or you force or you generate rook takes a6, in which case you just play e5 and you have this connected set of 3. So the real error move, this is probably a little obvious just because it's a 10-point swing. The error move was rook to c3. If you play rook to c5 here, you either end up with trading pawns or you end up with a much more favorable pawn structure. The issue with rook to c3 is that your pawns are fractured, as well as now the a6 pawn is going to get clipped on the next move. So this is definitely a superior move to rook to c3. In terms of how the rest of the rook pawn endgame was played, I think this is pretty much fine. b4, sure. But overall, I like this. I don't see any problems here. I'd probably play... I guess here I'd play a5. I would keep the pawns connected. Rook may play to b5, in which case you'd play to a6. But the connection between these pawns, I think, is more valuable than just basically trading them. That's what happens here. So I like a4, even though, again, the engine is sort of nitpicking this 9 versus 4.5 pawn advantage. I would keep these connected just because you can, as opposed to trading off pawns. One of the key principles is if you're up pieces, then trade off. If you're up material, trade off pieces, and if you're down material, trade off pawns. That's because drawing chances go up the fewer pawns there are. But overall here, this should be a solid victory for black. And I think the way to do it is to connect these pawns and then hold this file and then move your king up and then move the pawns up. The king is a little bit basically activating the king is important, but I would make more of an effort to avoid trading off pawns if possible. That's the strategic difference in this game. I think the strategic improvement is you're up 3 pawns in an endgame. Try not to trade the pawns off. It's not good for you to trade the pawns off. It's better to just basically push aggressively in the center and win, with an activated king. 3 pawns is fine, but hold on to your pawns. Play more defense here. Trading off the pawns kind of raises the attacking chances. Cool. Yeah. Thank you for sending that game in, Kiro. I thought that GM in that game that we were talking about, I thought that GM played almost perfectly. The fact that the 2 errors that I saw, which were knight to e5 and c5 as opposed to e5 break, those are really small errors. So that GM was really just playing extremely strong. But anyways, thought that was interesting, and thank you very much for sending the game, Kiro. So overall, SWWI is we just wanted to kind of look at the difference here. The opening looks good. I thought everything was sort of intuitive. Rook to c8, which is what the computer labeled as a mistake, I thought made intuitive sense. It wasn't the best tactical play, but I thought it was fundamentally correct. And then you just basically end up in a better position going into the endgame. The only real errors in this game came in this endgame, and I think they came from being too willing to trade off pawns. You want to win these pawns. You don't want to trade them. Here, too, I don't know. B4 is getting evaluated as best, but here I think you have a better move. I would play rook to... I think you can play rook to a3 here and just win. But I would say this trading of pawns was a mistake. If you're in a winning endgame up material, don't trade off the pawns. Keep them on the board if possible, as a basic principle. If you have a tactic that wins, then the tactic wins. But holding onto the pawns as opposed to trading them off should be beneficial to you as the person who's up material in the endgame. Good question, Limestone. My suggestion on that is definitely tactics. It depends on your rating level. But my question, or my let's take a look. Good question, R Paradox. Let's answer that. Why is rook c3 a blunder? I would say tactics. Tactics until you're about 2000. I would just really overkill it on the tactics. Like the percentage of games that are decided on tactical outcomes are so high, sub 2000 level, that it's just it is. In fact, we only have one emote for this channel at this moment, although Jen, who is my girlfriend, drew up some other good ones. I'm still behind on it, but the only emote I think I have for this channel is a tactics emote, and there's a reason why that is, and it's because tactics is usually my answer to that question. So I don't know. Yeah, playing long games is helpful too. Yes, tactics. Just go on a puzzle battle and do puzzle battle for like 2 hours a day for a couple months. It will really help your game. That's where I think your quickest return on time spent is. But that's just me. I have a style where I try to stick to very fundamental, tactically accurate play in not less aggressive positions. But all of those things I think are good. So. Why is rook c3 a blunder? But yeah, through whichever method you would like. Chess Tempo has free tactics. Chess.com has Puzzle Battle and Puzzle Rush. And then there's a great old program called CT-ART that has very good tactics as well. Why is rook c3 an error? Oh, why is rook c3 an error here? Uh, it basically doesn't. I mean, to be honest, I don't think rook c3 advances black's cause much here. I think black can make a few different choices that are more progressive, like king to d6. I think king to d6 will basically get the king more activated. Sorry, further on than this. Okay, sure. Oh, why is rook c3 an error? Yeah, good question. So the answer is because rook c5 is needed. So basically, after rook takes e6, black's pawns get completely fractured. Yeah, no, for sure. That's definitely yeah. This is an important part of this game. So thank you for asking the question, R Paradox. Rook to c8 or rook to c5 is better, and the reason why is because on rook takes e6, e5, and basically black has this solid pawn structure that's going to be pretty much impossible for white to stop. Black will play king f4 and then advance this pawn structure. If rook takes a6, if rook takes e6, then rook takes a5, and these pawns are fractured still, but 3 against 0 should be a win for black. So really good question. Thanks for asking it, R Paradox. But here, yeah, rook to c5 is pretty much necessary. If rook just goes to c3, then black ends up in like the worst of all worlds, where basically he's gonna end up 2 pawns to 1, because this a6 pawn is gonna fall the next move for sure, and now this is a draw, so because it's 2 pawns against 1 in a rook pawn endgame, like, to draw. So yeah, thank you for asking the question. If I go too fast through something, like, definitely always ask the question, and I'll give my best answer. But yeah, no, that's the answer to that. This rook has the opportunity to make a counter threat, and it needs to do that here. Rook to c3 is a non-threatening move. Rook to c5, and you put pressure on a5, and then you can play d5. But yeah, anyways, that's why. Thanks for asking the question, R. Like, always feel free to ask questions. I'm super happy to answer them. They are helpful in helping me know what I should be focusing on. So yeah, please ask. Thank you for asking the question, and everybody should feel free. Okay, cool. So here is another game. This is someone's game, and let's take a look. Take it from white's perspective. White's getting a big center against a flank opening here. G6, H6 is played, E6, Knight C3, D6, and basically just fast development and good center control. One of the things in this morning's lecture was about how quickly you can, or what are the good plans against playing against the hypermodern. This kind of, solid center, big center, and quick development for white, I think, is the best plan. You'll end up in an opportunity where you might have an opportunity to attack on the king side, and you want to have good piece placement to do it. Bishop to d3 should probably be played over to bishop to c4, but that should happen in the next move or two. Bishop c4, okay, sure. Bishop to d3 I think is a little better than bishop to c4. We can just look. But yeah, I think basically bishop to d3 is a more threatening diagonal, especially if black castles kingside here. Yeah, overall here, this should be pretty solid. Castling queenside is great, and now basically after bishop, I mean, I don't know if you need bishop to d3, but white can just get right into an attack here and have almost all of his pieces attacking almost immediately. This should be really, really good for white. The speed in which white can attack in a situation like this is really quick, and that's important. Bishop to b5, bishop d3, knight d2. And yeah, white's just gonna launch his attack. Black has really kind of suffered in development here. Black should have developed more quickly, but this kind of developmental, cramped development is characteristic of the modern. By the way, I have a bias. I don't think the modern's a very good opening, but so I have a bias. Others may like the modern more, but I've never been able to make it work, and I've tried it a few times as black, and it just doesn't work for me. So. Yeah, interesting. Okay, so cool. Yeah, I think you do a lot of stuff right in this game, someone. Let's take a look. The one improvement that I see is bishop to c4. I think bishop to c4 just isn't the right diagonal for this bishop. Bishop to d3 I think is better. You definitely want this bishop participating in the kingside attack, And the only way you can really activate this bishop on the kingside attack, and even then it'll only be attacking the f7 square, is with things like g4, f5, and overall it just takes a lot more effort to get this bishop involved. If you play bishop to d3, your kingside attack will involve like e5, h4, h5, and threats on g6. And I think those threats on g6 and threats on h7 are better than those threats on f7 against the castled king. So for that reason, I would develop on d3. There's also annoying things that black can do here. Like I'm wondering if b5 is probably the best move for black. Yeah, if you played a c4, black can basically open up this queenside expansion with tempo. So if you play bishop to d3, there's no opportunity like that. Bishop to c4, b5 is something that you probably want to avoid as white. So just play to d3 here, and your bishop is on the right diagonal. So yeah, bishop d3 over bishop to c4. Other than that, I think your general concept is right here. You see that the modern has left black with kind of limited development. This queenside expansion is probably black's best play, but it's really, really far behind in terms of the advancement of your attack. Here I would play f5, pawn takes, and h4. Overall, this was just excellent. Both the execution and theme were great. g5 is an error. This g5 hook is going to get really problematic after h4 takes g5. Yeah, this should be losing for black. I'm looking at knight to e5, but there's a lot of different ways. So yeah, this is crushing. Nice. Yeah, no. Well, not just that, but overall, good job kind of executing tactically at the end here. So overall in this game, I think white played a really effective attack, and this is a good demonstration of how to play against the modern. Basically with ideas like, if you're looking at this position, I think it's almost literally true that every piece from white, maybe not this knight e2. The knight e2 is the only one that's not super obvious to me. But basically, every piece by white is oriented towards attacking the king here. Rook g1 facing g8, h4, h5. But it's like white's whole position is an attack on the black king side. So it's going to be really difficult for black to, to get rid of this. h4, and white's just good. There's not really much there. So nice. Good playing by white. In terms of improvement of this game, I think there's a lot more to be said for things that black could have done instead of white could have done. White just played the hypermodern, or played against the hypermodern opening correctly. Bishop to c4, super good center, super good development. The only move that I can even pretend to have questions about is bishop to c4. Like bishop to c4 doesn't attack the best diagonal. Bishop d3 is better. Also, bishop b4 runs into b5, b4 potentially, which could be very annoying, but not too problematic. Just annoying for white to deal with. So bishop to d3, I think, is a better move. Other than that, I think your just method of straightforward development and aggressive attacking, this is sort of exactly how to play against the modern. And you basically didn't overextend. You extended appropriately into a very good attack. So overall, I like it. Good work. Makes sense. I mean, maybe knight e6. You may get, you may get your accuracy decreased by some of these these tactics at the very end, but they really don't matter very much. The game is over after the kingside pawns all fall. So overall, very good game, someone. Thank you very much for sending it. I really like the way that you played this. Bishop d3 probably is a better diagonal in your attack against the modern with e6 and f7. But overall, just really strong. A good example game of how, basically how to play effectively against a cramped opening when you have a big center. Just a win of the center, strong center versus a flank opening. Nicely done. Black should have developed a little bit more. He should have played moves like knight c6. He should have had a pawn break like c5 at some point. Overall, just too many pawn moves by black and not really enough effective development. But excellent excellent attacking. And yeah, nice game, someone. Thank you very much for sending it. Very solid. On to the next one. This one's from Pacific Piano Man. Cool. And let's take a look. Okay, cool. So this is interesting. Center counter gambit. We haven't spent a whole lot of time looking at center counter, against e5. d4, f6. I'm pretty sure this is a bad mistake. Black should not play this. And then when black plays this, play queen to h5. F-pawn moves are just really dangerous to play against in the opening. Queen h5 and you're really, this king is really in trouble. Your best move is probably king e7, but this game is won for white after queen h5. So this is very important. Very important improvement. Yeah, no, I would recommend Puzzle Battle, Limestone. That's my recommendation. I think if you do enough Puzzle Battle, you'll really improve a lot. If you do Puzzle Battle, you see about 600 puzzles an hour. And 600 puzzles an hour is really enough to build your puzzle recognition, your pattern recognition. So yeah, if you do 2 hours a day of Puzzle Battle for a month, you're going to see 1,200 times 30, so 36,000? Yeah, 36,000. You'll see 36,000 puzzles if you do Puzzle Battle for 2 hours a day for Puzzle Battle. I'd say Puzzle Battle's about 30. I think Puzzle Rush is even more, but Puzzle Battle, you see about 30 puzzles in 3 minutes. So you can see 600 puzzles per hour, and that means you can see 36,000 puzzles a month on Puzzle Battle. So, I don't think anyone does Puzzle Battle that much, but I think Puzzle Battle's just a great, a great tactical thing. 36,000, if you see 36,000 positions a month in puzzles, I guarantee that's going to help your pattern recognition. And then you'll see all the 1 and 2 move tactics. I mean, the percentage of games that are determined by 1 and 2 move tactics in, below 2,000 is very high. Like, it's a majority of games under 2,000 are determined by, like, 2 and 3 move tactics. Just one person misses something and then the other person picks up on it. So I guess I would just say, like, 36,000 puzzles a month, and your game, your game will improve. I've done it, I've done that specific thing myself at various points, and there's just no doubt about it. So anyways, f takes e5, queen h5 is something that I think, you should see. Basically, queen h5 is a very powerful move by your queen. You get to basically fork the king and fork the e5 pawn, which is black's best pawn. And I think this game is pretty tactically dominated. Interesting. Okay, cool. So yeah, biggest recommendation, Pacific Piano Man, spend time on tactics. At your level, the tactics are just the way forward. There's no other way to go about it. If you look at a report like this, these ridges are all sort of tactical opportunities, and you want basically the game analysis to be as flat as possible. If you look at GM level games, their game analysis is like almost flat, very little inaccuracy. So you want to execute efficiently tactically, and then flatten your game out. In terms of things to do differently specifically, queen h5 immediately is probably a kill in this position. After that, I think, bishop c4 along this long diagonal. I like the way that you've queen h5 is a big tactic to miss, so I that's the main thing. But this minor piece development is fundamentally correct. I would play pawn takes f3 here. The reason why I'd play pawn takes f3 is because it keeps your pawn structure intact and it also threatens checkmate. So yeah, here I guess I would say, you're following a fundamental which says don't move your queen out too early. And that's usually true. But I think you're sticking to this tactic of don't bring your queen out too early to the point where you're missing big opportunities. Queen h5, g6, queen takes, and then you're forking the king and rook, and you win a rook out of that. King e7 is also really bad for black. King goes to e7, and I think you play bishop to c4 and bishop to c4, and black's almost out of squares. So yeah, that's the biggest thing about this game. And then here I'd play queen takes f3 with threats on the f file, threats of queen to f7 being very dangerous, and overall, that's your improvement. This just worsens your pawn structure. So I guess I would say, don't. It is correct that in opening theory you don't want to move your queen out too early, but there are times, and with tactical training, which is my biggest recommendation for you. Moving your queen out too early, you'll know when your queen can win tactically, so you don't have to worry about moving your queen out too early. Like, yeah, I recognize that, like, after, fx e5, you're moving your queen to h5 on the fourth move, but this is actually a situation in which you have tactics that are important enough to break the fundamentals. Here, too, queen f3 is better than pawn takes. If you have to choose between messing up your pawn structure or moving the queen out, definitely move the queen out earlier. Overall here, I think black's looking pretty good. From a positional perspective, these f-pawns are a problem. And yeah, this is a good idea. You want to try to advance your attack and get your rook in, potentially. And then this was just a blunder. Here, I think just seeing this, king e3 leads to a mate in one. If you play king to c2, you will get mated a lot more slowly, but still a rough position. Okay, so overall, in your situation, I would definitely go with the recommendation that I just gave for tactical study. I think that's where you'll see the quickest return. If you just do puzzle battle or puzzle rush or whatever tactics trainer you prefer for an hour a day for a month, I think that will really help you out from basically that should get. I wouldn't be surprised if that exercise in itself got you close to 2000, but I don't want to overpromise. So, but I would definitely recommend doing tactics for an hour a day for a month. I think it'll lead you very quickly in the right direction. In terms of the center counter game, f6 is a big error. Let's take a look just a minute at what the correct responses to the center counter are. f6 is not playable. What is playable is e takes d4. This is the main move. This can transpose into the Danish gambit. And on d4, knight to c6 is also possible, and d6 is possible. On d6, the opening generally goes pawn takes, queen takes d8, king takes d8. And then white is facing a king that's permanently lost its ability to castle. But knight c6 variation I don't actually know that much about. Knight c6, and then knight f3, pawn takes, knight takes. And then it sort of transposes into some type of Scotch. Yeah, basically Scotch game. It transposes into the Scotch game. So, yeah, d4 provides some transpositional possibilities. Knight c6 transposes into the Scotch, but f6 is not a playable move. On pawn takes d4, you can play queen takes d4 if you want. I think that probably... so here, white's got three options. Queen takes d4, knight f3, or c3. c3 is the Danish. So say c3... this is the Danish gambit, c3, bishop c4, pawn takes b2, bishop to b2. This leads to an extremely aggressive position for white. It's still better for black with optimal defense, but yeah, here now you play d5. d5 is the right way to do this. But overall, this leads to a super dangerous position. Black's got to be really careful. When I play against the Danish gambit, I take to c3, I don't take to b2. I usually play, so c3, pawn takes c3, bishop c4, and then I usually play like d5 or knight f6, but I don't actually accept the Danish all the way. Sometimes d6 too can be okay. But anyways, the various openings. But yeah, thank you very much for sending the game, Pacific Piano Man. I really appreciate it. Please feel free to send as many as you'd like. But my main recommendation for you is your next step forward should be in tactical study, because you want to flatten out this game report as much as possible. Thanks for sending it though, Pacific Piano Man. I really appreciate it. Thank you for sending that. Cool. Here's Sam Sejuani's game. We'll take a look. Sam Sejuani plays e4, and he faces the Alekhine's defense. Alekhine's defense with knight e4. Interesting. Okay, so for people, so just so everyone sort of is on the same page, Alekhine's defense usually goes knight d5, c4, knight b6, d4. And then black plays, usually d6 here. And then that's the Alekhine's. E takes d6, and then roughly equal fork between c takes d6 and e takes d6. So big fork there. So anyways, knight to b6, cool, d4, and overall, I think white ends up with a reasonable game. Let's see what the eval is. Eval is, I'm sure, better for white. Eval is plus 1.3, looks fine for white. So knight e4 is really interesting. I don't know the theory for this, to be honest. This is an interesting idea. I don't know. I don't know. I've actually don't think I've ever seen anyone play knight e4 here. I don't know if it's incorrect, but it's definitely interesting. I guess I would probably play d3. Let's see the eval perspective. The eval, I think, is going to say d3 is the best. Yeah, d3, knight c5, and then maybe d4. Yeah, d4, and then either knight e6 or knight a6. They're saying that a6 is best. But overall, this is actually really interesting. I'm going to spend a minute on this opening because I've never seen it before, and actually, this is super interesting what happens. So yeah, overall, cool. It's always cool when you see something that you've never seen before. This is definitely an overextension of these pawns, but it doesn't win that knight. So, the engine is saying this is the best move, but I have no idea how to play a game that looks like this. This is really unusual. I sort of want to play. It sort of makes me want to start playing that variation just because I want to see how white would respond to it. But yeah, this is actually really cool. Obviously, this isn't good for black, but at the same time, I am very curious because these pawns do look overextended, and yeah, I don't know. I mean, I guess there will be threats like e6 and then messing up the f pawn, and then the king safety gets bad. That's probably white's best plan. But yeah, I have actually no idea how to do this. Let's see what the opening book can do with this. On d5, b4, so you've made all these pawn moves, and then a3. Overall, I guess I like white's position here. Both sides are completely undeveloped. And this knight on a6 is just crazy. It's crazy that the g8 knight ended up on a6. Really interesting, though, to be honest. I think white will be able to use white. And by the way, this is about as big a spatial advantage as I've ever seen for white at this point in the game. This is just a really interesting opening. I've never seen this before. So I would say like knight f3 or something. I'm just gonna follow the engine line, whatever. Bishop b2, c6, d6, b6, c takes. And now I still think white has a huge edge. Both sides remain completely undeveloped on move 11. Now I think it's time to get developed quickly as white. So we'll just play this game out to the end. But yeah, I think now's time to start development. But yeah, this is actually an extremely interesting game, Sam Sejuani. Bishop d4, cool. and white sort of, but the main point of this game is that that white basically materializes his advantage into the endgame. But you've actually really raised this. Actually, really raises a very cool point. Knight f6, e5, d3. Man, I have no idea what to do with this. Yeah, knight to f3. The fried liver's interesting. It's pretty aggressive. I play just the mainline Italian game. The thing that I don't like about the fried liver is that it involves, it basically doesn't. I prefer the canal variation of the Italian. Just since we've got him, I'm gonna play this game through again because I think that this is such an awesome opening. And I have no real frame of reference on it, so I want to learn for myself more than anything else. So here, let's take a look at the. I mean, I'm not saying it's good for black. It's it's probably bad for black, all things considered. But I've never seen it before, and I think it could really confuse white. I'm just looking at it from white's perspective, and I'm not knowing exactly how I would handle this if I played it over the board. Anyways, the Italian variation that I play is usually just bishop c4, bishop c5, and then a very early d3, an early bishop g5, and an attack on the king side. I keep things super simple. My idea is generally I'm pretty, I figure I'm usually pretty strong tactically. If I can get it into a tactical and positional game and out of opening theory with something that's reasonably solid, I'm happy. So these are the ideas that I play. Things like knight c3, knight d4, bishop g5. This is what I play most frequently over the board. I don't always do it. I like to switch things up. Since my game doesn't really, I'm usually not too oriented on opening theory. In fact, this stream has been super helpful for me because I've gotten to improve my opening theory knowledge. But yeah, I just play this kind of very solid Italian game and attack on the king side and castle on the queen side generally. Yeah, I like d3. d3 with knight c3 to knight d5 threats, bishop to g5 threats, and then castling queenside and attacking on the king side. That's how that game works. Less about the center, more about the advanced attack on the king side. Yeah, no. I sort of messed this up. I think I was saying the wrong time earlier today too. But yeah, no worries. But yeah, this is the Italian game, and then bishop to g8. It looks pretty good. Anyways. In terms of improving the situation, this opening I have no real insight into. It looks like the type of thing where you should just start, basically chase the knight a little enough to pick up the center, and then start developing aggressively. So yeah, that's how I would play it. On knight a6, I would play knight f3, and just basically get my minor pieces developed way faster. Yeah, well, the weird thing is that this isn't even... Oh, this is crushing. Okay, cool. So this is a miniature game. I didn't realize that this game was so short, and this is actually the first time we've gone through it. But yeah, big miss by black playing queen takes d4. Knight takes c6, and the queen is won. This is a very quick miniature game for Sam Sejuani. Nice point. Thank you very much for sending that. Yeah, another really brutal and quick win. Very cool. But I'm actually more stuck on this opening now, because I don't know what I would do against this as white. D3, yeah, D3, D5, knight F3, and yeah, I guess yeah. So D4 and then knight A6. The other move here is knight to e6. On knight to e6, the response is d5, which is considered to be the best by the engine. D5, knight c5, and then you play even another pawn move, b4. This is a little, basically this gives white a huge center advantage and some attacking chances along the c4 to g8 diagonal. Moves like e6 become playable. Overall, super interesting though. It's kind of funny. You just never see these types of openings, but they can be very interesting. I'm tempted to play this. I'm going to play this as there's a USCF tournament tonight. I'm probably going to play this opening as black, just to see what happens. if I get an opportunity against e4. We'll take a look at the game at some point too. But yeah, I like this because I think it puts White in a position where he has no for a junk to be realistic, it's not a good opening for Black, but it is very confusing to establish a plan as White here. So yeah, the two options here: knight e6, knight a6. On knight e6, you play d5, then knight c5, then b4, then knight a6, then a3. So you've made a ton of pawn moves as White, and you have a huge space advantage. Then you can basically develop your pieces to exactly where you want them as White. You can play bishop to b2, bishop c4, knight f3, and overall, White's just looking awesome here. No problems at all from White's perspective. So d6, bishop b2. This in this particular game, things got very simplified. I'm not sure if I'd simplify them this easily. Now White's got kind of he has no pawns in the center. But yeah, White should have better better center control, better development, and I guess in terms of long-term plans, I would start an attack on the king side, but that's yeah, that's a good question. Queen h3, queen takes e6. Anyways, I've never seen this thing before. This, it's cool. I played many games in my life, and I've never seen Alekhine's with knight to e4. Yeah, I think you can face off against it fundamentally. I think that realistically, it's not a good opening, but in terms of creating something that is difficult for White to face, I really like this as a general idea. Your opponent made some tactical errors after this. Queen takes d4 is a big tactical error. But overall, he raises a very interesting question. So if I get an opportunity, I'm gonna play bishop. I'm gonna play this opening as Black just to see what my opponent does. Anyways, really interesting stuff. Thank you very much for sending it, Sam Sejwani. Good job on the quick win. And thank you for sending a game that makes me think about an opening that I've never seen before. That is a weird opening. Interesting. Cool. And then we've got one more game, and then I have class that starts right at 6:30. Here, this is Monster Knight's game. Monster Knight is playing Black here. And let's take a look. So Monster Knight is playing Black here, e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, and you're basically facing off Ruy Lopez. There's a few different lines in the Ruy Lopez. I'm sort of curious, which is the most common. I guess knight f6 is by far the most common here. And bishop takes c6 is interesting. It sort of makes me wonder why bishop takes c6. If the exchange variation was, if White was interested in playing an exchange Ruy Lopez, then I'd wonder why he didn't do it a move earlier. But I guess it's just a style thing. Anyways, d3, bishop d6, bn d2, castles. And basically, White's looking very good. Basically, this is kind of the mainline, mainline Ruy Lopez. Black has a disrupted pawn structure. This bishop is a little bit stuck on d6, and this knight c4 outpost is reasonably solid. In terms of looking at this opening, knight c4 is the most common move. I don't know if it's the best move. We're still in opening theory, so it's pretty clear that knight c4 is the move that's played. I'm wondering if there might be something better for White. Either castles or, maybe knight f1. But yeah, trading, even though it is Black's good squared bishop, trading this knight on c4 for the good squared bishop on d6 is a little bit, I think is a little questionable. Castling is considered to be better by the engine. But the opening book, the opening book is saying that knight c4 is the move. I think probably the odds of it being a fairly old Ruy Lopez game are good. I think I would play castles over knight to c4 here. The main thing about knight to c4 is that you end up trading off your knight, which you've moved 3 times, for this bishop that's stuck on d6 and has only moved once. Just feel like it's sort of a tempo loss for you. Knight takes, pawn takes, and overall I like black's position. This, I like white's position. This looks good. How do you know when to sacrifice pieces? Main answer to that, good tactical understanding. We saw a game earlier today. We could potentially go take another look at it if we get a few extra minutes. But we saw a game that where there was the right idea, which was to attack on the king side, but there was a bishop takes h7 sacrifice that came too early. And I think the best way is just really make your tactical vision strong so you can know what is and isn't a sound sacrifice. It's a really good question, our paradox, but yeah, I think having a really good tactical understanding so that you recognize patterns and you can see patterns like 3, 4, 5 moves ahead. That's what's really needed. And the way that you do that is through tactical study, like puzzle battle, puzzle rush, that kind of stuff. But yeah, we had a good example earlier today where there was a great thought which was just attack on the king side because king safety was poor. And then the sacrifice, there was a very unsound sacrifice made on h7 in a position where the idea was definitely correct. If the white queen ever moves out of the diagonal, can you sacrifice the knight for the pawn to win both? On this one, I want to make sure that I know or that I fully understand the question. Oh, good question. Yeah, knight takes g4. Yeah, you're asking if in this position, what's on the screen, if the queen moves, can you play knight takes g4 sacrifice? Maybe. Good question. So let's try it. So say knight's on h4 there, and then rook d8, and then instead of queen f3, black plays queen f1, queen e1 for some reason. Queen f3 is better than queen e1, but say queen takes e1. Let's take a look at this line, this knight takes g4 line. I think it's not quite sound because it runs into knight to g2. So I think that this is going to be tricky. But I saw knight g2, but I was thinking maybe rook e5, rook h5. But I think white can just play f3 and disrupt this attack. So I think it's a really good question. Basically you're asking, in this position, if the queen moves off of the light squared diagonal, can you play knight takes g4? It's a really good question, and it's a good question, also, the relative value of the knight versus the 2 pawns you'd get there, but I think that it's probably just not the best idea. I think on queen e1, you play knight takes g4, pawn takes g4, queen takes g4, and black's just looking, basically black's just looking good. So, really good question. Thank you for asking it. Feel free to ask as many as you want, but yeah, I think that the knight to g2 defensive resource is enough to make that not the best option, not a sound option for the black sacrifice. Sort of tough to see, in terms of tactical play, but really good question. Thanks for asking it, our paradox. So yeah. So this got dangerous after white wins a piece. So let's go through this again. Overall, I think, I don't know. I think black's position is fine. I want to see exactly where things start to get a little bit tricky. So here's the biggest one. And this is one that I've talked about before on the stream, but I think it's important, which is, bishop to g5 is a threat, for sure. The thing about it as a threat, though, is that what really makes bishop g5 powerful as a threat in the Ruy Lopez or the Italian game is the ability to support that threat with either queen on f3 or a knight on d5. If you just play bishop to g5 by itself, usually, you can kind of, it may take a few moves, Also available to you on bishop to g5 is h6, g5 after bishop to h4. Bishop to g5 is not really a threat without the other two supporting moves there. Either knight, having a threat of knight to d5 or having queen on f3. So when you play h6, it's sort of not the best idea. On h6, you're creating what's called a hook for white to attack here. Basically, there's a fundamental concept post-castling, which is that every pawn move that you make post-castling weakens your kingside. Sometimes it's worthwhile, and sometimes it's necessary to weaken your kingside with moving your pawns, but I don't think you should do it proactively. White doesn't have enough supporting pieces to make h6 worth playing. h6 is basically a weakening move. It basically makes your king safety worse. Not better to play h6 proactively. So on this move, I would play something straightforward. Like I might play bishop to g4, threatening queen to d1. That could be strong. I'd look at bishop to e6. I'd look at knight to e8. And overall here, I would just, I might play rook e8 even. Like, rook e8 straightforwardly holds on to the e5 pawn. But the issue with h6 is that it creates an additional point of attack for white on the black king side. So that's why I would not play that here. This all looks fine. You're sort of white's starting to attack you. Rook a d8 lets in f4. It does weaken. It is double-edged, but I think black or white can start attacking you on the king side pretty hard. That's sort of difficult to deal with. So f4 is some kind of a missed opportunity for white, but you can't stop it either way. Here, I think the challenging d5 move is probably the best. Yeah, knight takes d5, sure. Yeah, this was kind of a quiet. This sort of very quietly went from a +2 to a +9. The things that I'd revise in this opening. I think h6 is the most problematic move. Basically weakening your king side against the Ruy Lopez is dangerous because the Ruy Lopez has the opportunity to give white big attacking chances. With a kingside pawn storm. So h6 may defend against bishop to g5, but it makes black more vulnerable to a pawn storm on the king side. So that's what I have to say on that topic. Don't play h6. There are times when it's necessary to play h6, but it's not a good move to play proactively. I know it's scary to face down bishop to g5, but you just sort of have to let it happen here. Cool, this all looks good. And, yeah. So, interesting situation. Yeah, thank you very much for showing that, for sending this game, Monster Knight. So h6, I would definitely make an improvement on. I'd make a straightforward developing move. You're castled kingside, so any pawn move of h7, g7, or f7 is all going to weaken your kingside safety. And it's just not that important to prevent g5 or bishop to g5. Then after that, d5, I guess, was the engine suggested. Counterplay in the center. And, yeah. This just got a... Yeah, this unfortunately just gets a little bit tough. Yeah, I mean, white plays pretty accurately. I'm not sure how much counterplay you got, really. I don't think that white's, ridiculously strong, but I think that the position plays pretty intuitively for white. I might play queen f7 here. But then again, you're down a pawn, so... Yeah, white played pretty accurately. Kingside attack was a good idea. Where did you lose the pawn? Oh, you just lost the e5 pawn. Right. So yeah, here, you know, here I think a lot of your problems stem from losing the e5 pawn. If you play rook to e8, I don't think it, you know, it'll take white a long time to win it. You know, you can basically play bishop to g5 and be fine. So yeah, so rook e8 there I think is good. Threats on e5, you know, holding e5 is worthwhile for black. And really, you know, most of your problems from this game stemmed from you know, basically not, you know, you get down that e5 pawn and you don't really have the opportunity to get it back very easily. So yeah, overall rough game for black. White played very well, but fundamentally, I think you should be less afraid of bishop to g4 and more worried about the pawn that's actively hanging. Rook e8, I think. Rook e8 or maybe bishop to g4. Sort of curious about bishop to g4. The engine doesn't love that one either. h3, bishop takes f3, queen takes f3. It slows things down on the e5 pawn, but I might play knight e8 here. Anyways, a very interesting situation. Yeah, I don't know what to really do, but yeah, rook e8. It sucks. I mean, white played very accurately. You know, I think that h6 is a makeable mistake, but it did allow a pawn down and a pawn that white never let you have an opportunity to get back. So, against a very accurate player, an inaccurate move like h6 can just be really deadly. Rook e1 defending the e5 pawn keeps the material equal. It's better than bishop to g4, which also keeps the material equal. Queen e7 would be an idea, maybe. But overall, yeah, you know, hanging the pawn / creating a hook for white to attack was not the right move here. This game was basically decided by one positional error. Very strong play, 95% accuracy for white. White played very well. Yeah, brutal loss. You know, it's tough. It's tough to win a game where your opponent plays 95. Yeah. I guess the engine is advocating this quick counterplay in the center, d5, and then white has to kind of make some decisions. But overall, this d5, you know, creates counterplay for black a little bit earlier. Tough game though. All right. Yeah, so we're done a little bit early. I wanted to take a look well, I sort of want to take a look at that that game. If Tarash is still here, we can take a look at that theory that he wanted to take a look at. What was the opening that you wanted to look at? We have about 5 minutes. So I don't know if you're still here, but either way, I wanted to look a little bit. Since I went through it a little bit quickly, we can take a more look at this this note boom variation. This is played from black's perspective. I'm not sold on the value of it, to be honest. I think that you know, yeah, but I started this one early enough that that he actually he had been here for a minute. Yeah, it's no worries. But I wanted to look at the note boom variation, which was this the one that I started off this lecture with. D4, D5, C4, E6, knight C3, E6, knight F3. And basically, the second most, I mean, you know, the note boom variation is not, you know, I don't particularly like it for black, but it is the second most commonly played thing here. Knight F6 is by far the most common. It's like a 90+% move. But the note boom variation, just taking on C4 here prior to a bishop to D3, I think it simplifies a little bit too much. I'm not a fan of taking on c4. Sometimes I'll even hold back on taking on c4 after bishop to d3. I really think this pawn structure is solid for black. So disrupting it early is something that I don't want to do if I don't have a good reason to do it. But still, pawn takes c4 is the second most common move here. A4 is by far the most common move after that, and then either bishop b4 or knight to f6. I have a feeling that knight to f6 leads to lines in which there's less of a fight over the queen side. What really caused a problem for black here was trying to treat it like the queen's gambit accepted and hold on to a gambited pawn. You can't really hold on to the pawn in the queen's gambit accepted. Pretty much just have to give it back. Here, where you basically just, you basically just start a king side, or with knight f6, you just basically develop and give back the pawn. And overall, if that's your strategy, to just develop and give back the pawn, I sort of question why you played pawn takes c4. I would have just kept the material equal with that triangle pawn structure, and that triangle pawn structure is solid. I usually play the Italian game R Paradox. I'm an Italian game player. I've been trying out d4 recently a little bit. D4 and Queen's Gambit tends to be interesting, but I still think the most classic openings are e4. They're the most fun to play. That said, basically AlphaZero has indicated that d4 is objectively better than e4, so I take that in mind. I very strongly value computer analysis. I think computer analysis is really a good way to assess openings at this point, like better than any person. So yeah, after AlphaZero, I pretty much have switched my thinking to thinking that d4 is objectively better. As d4, I like the London system, another move that's considered to be extremely good by computer valuation. So d4 London system I like, and an Italian game I like, and what I have the most experience with. So those are my favorite openings as white. But yeah, that's I think that's the best choice. On this, pawn takes c4, I think is there's no reason the trading off the d pawn for the c pawn would improve black's pawn structure here. So overall, I'm not sold on the value of d takes c4 in the note boom defense. That seems like a bad pawn trade. Keep this structure. Make white play pawn takes d5, and then you play e takes d5 and play your bishop to f5. The worst piece for white in this opening is the bishop on c8. So I think in general it's just better to force white to take your d5 pawn if possible, and then retake with the e pawn. That's what I like to do as black. I don't like the early pawn to take c4 capture, but overall really interesting stuff. So I don't know, tough games, interesting games. And but yeah, I would look at the value of pawn takes d5, e takes d5 before I looked at the value of black pawn takes c4. I don't really think it helps black's position. It's a little bit better if the bishop's on d3 and then the bishop has to waste a tempo moving to take the pawn on c4. But still, as a general concept, I'm not huge on trading the d5 pawn for c4. Make white make that trade. Don't make that trade proactively. Anyways, very interesting games. Thank you guys for bearing with me on this unusual schedule. I'm gonna figure out my schedule a little bit better now that I know kind of when my classes are. But yeah, that's overall interesting stuff. Thank you all very much for sending the games, and thank you for being here. I'm gonna work on the schedule. I'm gonna figure out exactly when the best time going forward is. But expect the 6 o'clock schedule to change not too long from now. Anyways, guys, thanks very much for being here. Next lecture is at 10 a.m. Eastern tomorrow morning. I hope to see you there. Thanks all for sending the games, and thanks all for asking such good questions. Very interesting stuff. Thanks a lot. Have a good one, guys, and I'll see you tomorrow, hopefully. Have a good one. Good night. Bye.